And I think we will get started. So, GM to everybody, regardless of your location or anything else. Welcome to Numbers Therapy, episode 13. By the way, every time I come on and I say the episode number, I get nervous. I carry a document on my side. The document has questions and everything else. So I get nervous. I'm going to say the wrong episode number each time, but I'm pretty sure it's episode 13, which is exciting. Today's topic is diversified modern investing and Poland. Two things that don't sound like they go together, but they do, and they will. So it's worth calling out. Everybody who's on here is kind of in luck, I would say, at this point. You know, with 13 episodes in with Numbers Therapy, we're kind of expanding out and creating a connective string across episodes beyond just kind of discrete episodes with a specific topic, right? So we're really in process of going towards macro right now on multiple dimensions. So what that means is historically we focused from a functional or skill dimension. So today, for instance, that would be the diversified modern investing in the title, right? But now we're incorporating another macro dimension as well, including geographic, where we, quote unquote, travel to other locations and get market insights for like a real global picture to form that in our minds, or even a demographic dimension to learn about like certain segments in there. So teasing out where some future episodes may go. But as a result, you'll see additional value moving forward by listening in on a consistent basis to be able to form a bigger whole picture of what's happening around the world. And as a result, better plan, strategize, make decisions, figure out how to partner, all those good kinds of things, right? So I think it'll be a pretty cool, fun dimension. We all like traveling, so it'll feel like that a little bit, which is super fun. So in terms of normal context, right, the purpose, of course, of Numbers Therapy is to talk through all of the macro stuff and bring on and showcase our experts in here. And today is no different. The specific goals, of course, are so that everyone understand how all of the big things and big pieces fit together, including myself. Make better decisions with NFTs and other investments using a balanced perspective, learn about or from some of our people in here and get different perspectives. And then lastly, learn about different areas and opportunities that exist out there as well and different ways of thinking. So also, I always say this as a reminder, we're all from different backgrounds in here, and that's totally cool. And what's so great about this place. But as a result, you'll see two channels, right? We have the office hours chat where you spam gifts and other things like that throughout and make fun of me and other people. Totally cool. There's also the guest questions chat that exists too. Drop any questions you have along the way. Intro questions, simple questions. What is an acronym? Just please don't be shy about asking it. Someone else, I will guarantee you, is thinking the same thing. And it's really important that we're all along for the ride in the conversation. So if you have any questions whatsoever, please drop it in and I'll make sure that, we get an answer along the way so you're fully comfortable and along for the ride. Last note and disclaimer, none of what you hear in here is financial advice. It is all opinions. So without further ado, today we got a pretty cool dude on. First off, and needless to say, he's our Polish representative, though I don't think he's originally from Poland, but he lives in Poland and serves as our Polish representative. He also took the long trip to make it out to NFTLA, where I got to spend some time with him, which was a total pleasure. He's a really lovely dude, but he's also very humbly smart and has done a lot of things to test a variety of investment strategies and some entrepreneurial approaches. So even, kind of predating the Web3 space. So I happen to very much appreciate his very, very thoughtful style. And what I was hoping we could hit on today is how he thinks about various investments, lessons he's learned, and how he applies these principles to Web3. And then, of course, in playing with our recent theme, we are going to travel to Poland together and get a bit of insight on what the market is like over there, psychology, pathways to adoption, things like that. So without further ado, please welcome Tomer. Tomer, how is it going today?
Hey, Aslo. Doing very, very well. Super excited to be talking with you today and hope I can provide some unique insights to everyone here. And yeah, thank you for the humbling introduction.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you always do. You always have a good perspective, unique perspective, all that good stuff. So I appreciate it. So maybe the best place to start the conversation today would be you could talk a little bit about your background first. Before Web3, before it all went down in NFT land. What have you spent your time on? What things have you focused on or tried? What had you already learned maybe coming into Web3 that maybe even many people your age hadn't learned, right? So whatever you feel comfortable with sharing, pre-NFT land.
Sure. So I was born in '98, which I think was a pretty good year for people um, to become interested in the internet and computing. And so from a young age, I really loved gaming. And in my early teens, I started getting fascinated with making money online. Um, I wish I could pinpoint the exact reason for that. I want to say it's because I wanted to buy like additional Minecraft accounts when I was 12 or 13, or buy Counter Strike skins and stuff like that. In any case, I wanted to be able to make those kind of discretionary purchases myself without having to borrow a parent's credit card. Um, so, from a very young age, I got started with doing like Fiverr gigs and freelance writing, and some other unsuccessful, perhaps somewhat spammy ventures that you can kind of easily get dragged into if you're young and naive in the Fiverr sphere. Um, but that was really interesting for me. I learned a lot from kind of my experience trying to make money online at such a young age, and that kind of led me as I got older to explore freelance writing more, because that was one of the ways that I tried to make money at a very young age that really stuck for me, that succeeded. And so in my later teen years, like 15 to 18 years old, I really started focusing a bit more on freelance writing while at high school. And that was really cool because I was a high school student, but I was able to bring in some decent money every month from freelance writing. Um, Living in Poland at the time as well with American clients. So that was a really great combo because obviously Poland is a lot cheaper than the West, but I was still getting paid American rates. Um, and so obviously it started off with those less successful ventures when I was younger. As I got older, I tried other things. I tried a SAT test prep service, which I never really got off the ground, a resume editing service. I tried drop shipping t-shirts, various things like that. Um, and what's really interesting when I look back on some of those experiences is I I tended to find some success in things where I really put myself out there. A lot of things, a lot of endeavors, I was somewhat self-limiting. So I would come up with a great idea for a business. I would buy a domain name. I would build a website. I would think out some processes, but I'd never really put it out there to the world. And obviously, if you don't put yourself out there, you're just not going to get any business. So in hindsight, that's a really good lesson that I've learned from internet endeavors. And then I guess that led me into crypto around 2017 and 2018. This was about the time that I had really started focusing on freelance writing. I finished high school. I started putting some savings into crypto, enjoyed the thrill of the 2017 bull market, and then watched all of my small portfolio disappear. But that's what really got me into crypto, just this progression from trying to make a buck online to having a career online and then to kind of investing online.
That's super interesting. I mean, you pointed out a couple things in there I didn't even know about you, to be honest with you. Which is one, this like heavy freelance orientation that you had that you started, which is super cool. But what's of course interesting about that is, as it pertains to like us in the Web3 space, right? Is we have like several dimensions that's probably coming in very handy, right? Like for one, like outsourced VAing, outsourced teams, things like that. Two, if you want to build anything, right? Like leveraging freelancers and contractor global marketplaces, it takes knowledge to be able to do that. So you kind of came in, it sounds like, with these skills, having a complete sense of these skills and what it's like for contractors, things like that. So that's super, super cool. The other thing that I appreciate you saying, by the way, that I think is a worthwhile thing to touch on is this kind of that point you made, that recognition point about, I had some businesses that were not so successful. I didn't put myself out there fully, that kind of a thing. And I think it's going to be relevant to various people, maybe in here or listening later, which is, for anybody who's like now in building mode or considering building mode or hasn't maybe had their own business before, right? The premise of, you know, a single business or a single thing that you're trying or testing doesn't define you, even if you put yourself out there, even if it doesn't work, right? And so like we've had examples of that in here where some of our best people have gone to create projects and they haven't worked out exactly well, right? But how do you think of those people now as a result? I don't think of them any differently whatsoever. In fact, I think of them more highly because they tried and things don't always go right and that kind of a thing. And I feel like oftentimes there's this disconnect that exists between, how new entrepreneurs or potential entrepreneurs are nervous how they're going to get perceived, and reality, which is that people really appreciate like kind of the courage that they had to put themselves out there and try. So yeah, I appreciate you hitting on both of those things. So let's segue into Web3 and NFTs. So you hustled all these things, right? You got into crypto, like you said, and your portfolio was a little bit wavy, like you were suggesting. When did Web3 and NFTs come about? How did you hear about it? What was your reaction when you heard about this? Were you excited? Were you cynical? Like, how were you feeling at that point?
Sure. So, not sure exactly how we're defining Web3 here, but I will kind of start out obviously with this backdrop of me having gotten into crypto a bit, and put some discretionary income into a few cryptocurrencies back in 2017. Um, you know, from then crypto really stood out to me just because, again, it was like a global investment market. I lived in Poland now for like 8 years. Prior to that, I lived in Spain. Neither of those countries are particularly business hotspots, and they have their own kind of regulatory, what's the word, like circumstances. It's not always that easy to get access to the Western markets I read about and watch about on YouTube, especially when you're underaged, as I was at the time when I was getting into all of this. So I got into crypto kind of with the draw of, again, that aspect of it being internet first. And I started investing a bit. We had the 2017 bull run, the 2018 bear. And then I was a freelance writer at the time. I continued freelance writing for those next couple of years and putting away a bit of money every month into what I thought were interesting crypto projects. And for the longest time, that brought no results. I had a portfolio which I didn't even look at because it was so small and it was doing nothing. And then I want to say in early 2020, the value of some of the assets that I'd picked up started picking up. And that caught my attention again. I'd been freelance writing for a couple of years, but now these assets that I've effectively forgotten about, that I don't really expect much from, are starting to increase in value in quite a significant way. And a couple of particular assets, crypto assets, I was in kind of at the start of 2020, started to outperform the market before we really went into the bull run. And then we went into the spectacular crypto bull run of 2021, and I guess late 2020 as well. Although I'd need to pull up a chart to remember fully. And I made some decent gains in crypto, and I was in a lot of ways very lucky with the exact assets that I had allocated to. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. I've been writing, I've been trading kind of my time for income, but this is something where I kind of have an edge because I've always been computer first. I have kind of some technical knowledge that others don't have. I should definitely dedicate more time to crypto. And so last year, as the crypto market started to look a bit more, or started to maybe top out, I guess you could say, I started looking around at, well, this market is clearly here to stay. It's a lucrative place to be. What are the other kind of industries or sectors within this industry that are potentially taking off? And that's when I found NFTs kind of summer of last year. Some might say a few months too late. And then for a couple of months in the summer of last year, I was just throwing crypto gains at random NFTs with no rhyme or reason, with no strategy, which I regret deeply. But then I found MVHQ in I want to say October, and since then I've just seen kind of what's possible with NFTs. It's a really unique space, unlike anything I've ever been in before, and obviously there's a lot of scope for utility within crypto NFTs and Web3, even if it isn't always used.
Yeah, that's very very interesting. Let's just talk about this kind of discovery thing. You may have to think back here, and if you don't have the answer, you don't remember, totally cool also. But the fact is that you were in Poland at the time, as you said. We're getting some feedback, by the way. Is that on your side or is that somebody else's side? I don't know. If
I
Poop, if you
think
could
that's
check on
somebody else.
somebody's feedback. Um, so yeah, one of the interesting things I think that we should hit on more is, right, is you're, like you said, you're in Poland at this point, right? Poland, as you said, in addition to Spain, not exactly very crypto friendly markets or crypto forward markets, right? So whereas in the U.S., maybe Canada, we were all probably like one or a couple friends away from having heard about MVHQ or having heard about NFTs, that kind of a thing. What do you remember back? Like, what was that discovery process like to come across crypto, for instance, where you probably didn't have many friends in it, or discover NFTs where you probably didn't have many friends in it? What was that like? If do you happen to remember that?
Sure. So the journey towards NFTs definitely started with crypto. Again, this idea of being at the height of the bull market last year, saying, wow, look at what's possible in this industry. Where should I look next? And that is probably the moment where I'd obviously heard about NFTs kind of through the grapevine, but mostly online at that point, if that makes sense. But then going back even further, how I got into crypto. I mentioned I was into gaming. I think it was kind of again with my I don't want to say obsession, but with my interest at a young age in being able to pay for things myself, and being able to pay for CS skins and buy Minecraft accounts. I actually remember selling some gaming items for Dogecoin like years back. I want to say 2015 or 2016. And so that kind of sparked the interest in crypto, which took off in 2020, 2021. And then that's where I started to proactively say, look, I've heard about NFTs online. This is a big industry. It's an exciting sector. I need to start looking into it more myself. Unfortunately, I didn't have too many friends in the industry, at least not based here in Poland. So it was very much a digital first discovery process.
That's too. So basically, what you're saying is you were in the business of NFTs, trading skins and other things in gaming for crypto before the concept of gaming NFTs kind of was even a thing. To be honest with you, that's absolutely amazing.
Yeah,
Very
I mean
very
those same kind of economies, just without the skins being NFTs, if that makes sense.
yeah
So
yeah.
it's really interesting. I hadn't drawn that parallel before, but yeah, obviously some of these same economies we see today, except I was trying to trade things on closed platforms, centralized platforms for those decentralized cryptos.
Super interesting. So you, from an investment standpoint, right? You touched on gaming, like you said, and acquiring skins and weapons and all that good stuff to be able to sell. I know you and I have also talked about like real estate and your thought, a little bit dipping into real estate and other alternative investments. And then NFTs comes along, of course. Like, how are you thinking about NFTs at that point from an investment standpoint? And is there a place in your mind anymore for things like real estate or more traditional things, or is that just not as relevant anymore, completely by the wayside? Is it a balanced approach where you have like you think about it from like a wider portfolio standpoint with some balance? Like, how do you think about those things?
Sure. So like I mentioned back last year at the height of the bull run, I've been hearing about NFTs for months. And originally, I was skeptical. I did think they were a bit of a fad. I didn't see the utility in NFTs as much as I'd seen the utility in liquid crypto assets. But then when I started to dig into them more, I started to see more of that utility. And I think the first utility that everybody kind of uh, or most people touch when it comes to NFTs is just that flex utility. So, being a crypto Twitter participant at the height of the bull market last year, I saw a lot of punks. I started seeing apes and various other collections and hearing about various NFT artists. And that's kind of what got me looking into it more, just it being such a talked about space and seeing that kind of digital flex aspect. And obviously, as I've looked into NFTs more, I have seen a lot more utility for them, and they become more and more interesting to me every month. So I'm definitely excited to see kind of how they grow, how the sector, how the industry grows over the coming years. And that's one of the things kind of I'm most curious about and excited about in the coming years, which is seeing how some of these established NFT communities thrive, and seeing kind of whether their longevity models kind of hold up to the test. Um, and then in terms of how that works into like a wider portfolio, um, I I set myself a bit of a rule over the last year or two, which is that to an extent, where I make money, I want to try and keep some exposure, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And I made decent money in crypto, so I've kept a lot of exposure in crypto. I've made decent gains in NFTs, but not quite the same gains that I'd made in crypto, or not quite the same gains that a lot of people in this group have made. And so I don't hold that same long term NFT exposure that a lot of kind of NFT first people in this group might do. I don't hold a Bored Ape or a CryptoPunk for the long term. That's something I definitely want to kind of work towards, which is building up a portfolio of kind of long hold assets. Right now, what's super interesting for me in NFTs, kind of as part of a portfolio, is just all of the innovation that's taking place, all of the market inefficiencies, kind of how much there is to just tap into there, how many asymmetric kind of short term opportunities there are. And every month I'm able to realize, I mean, maybe with the exception of the last few months, I'm able to realize some profits from that and earmark something for a long term collection at some point. And then just tying back to the second part of your question, just with how that um, contrasts with my investing thesis for other assets. Um, I I've seen a lot of videos on YouTube that recommend real estate as an asset class. When I was a freelance writer and I wanted to start becoming a business owner and an investor, the asset class to invest in that I kept seeing on YouTube and elsewhere, and saw kind of people around me, especially in Poland, where real estate is probably the most important asset class for investments. That basically led me to say, yeah, long term, I want real estate. And so that's kind of my low risk part of my portfolio, which is, obviously the returns aren't there. But when I do get a decent chunk of capital, I try to pull it out and buy a piece of property, or at least I have done for the last year or two. And so I think one thing that I've really come to realize over the last couple of months is that you can make a lot in the crypto and NFT space, and you can actually have a meaningful impact in the crypto and the NFT space without having loads of capital invested, as long as you invest the time. With property, that's a lot harder. Obviously, you can do various things in property which require less capital, like subletting or things to that effect, or Airbnb. But in terms of the way I'm viewing property as just kind of a long term investment, a hedge against inflation, it's quite capital intensive. Whereas I don't see that so much with NFTs and crypto. Even with limited capital, there's a lot of opportunity if you're just there and you're present in the market.
That's very interesting. So let me see if I could recap this, okay, and tell me how I do here, right? So for you, it's for most people, the flow of funds in here might be something like, you know, NFTs, trade NFTs, flip NFTs, whatever else it is, push it into ETH for the long term, and maybe they'll invest it into their own business or whatever else it is. In your case, at least, it's maybe some NFTs, definitely a bit of crypto. Some portion of that stays in each of them very, very intentionally, and maybe the rest of the gains go into something more like real estate. So real estate might be like your ultimate rotation for safety and cash flow and all those good kinds of things, while you have some money continuing to stay in the things that generate you money as well, like NFTs and crypto. Is that a pretty good description?
Yeah, that's a great summary. Hit the nail on the head. Hit the head on hit the what is the
Hit the
phrase?
hit the nail on the nail or the head on the head.
Okay, yeah.
No, joking.
The only thing I'd add, which I've been kind of thinking about over the last couple of weeks, is, or at least I was thinking about 2 months ago or a month ago. Obviously, Ethereum has recovered since then. Is just at these Ethereum prices. Obviously, during the bull run, I took profits to something, relatively speaking, a lot safer, which was property at prices like these. There's a very strong temptation for me to sell a piece of property and buy back ETH, and that's something I kind of haven't come to a conclusion on yet, which is, should my property portfolio be kind of immutable? I never touch that. That's my long term nest egg, or should I almost also use it as kind of a secondary hedge against inflation and kind of a pot to swing trade back and forth with?
That's very, very cool, and a tricky question, obviously, that many of us are probably
Yep.
thinking about, if it's from real estate to something, or even stables in, right? Like that same question seems to be coming up, right, as we debate going from 1,000 to 1,500 and then, or 1,600 and then sliding, and then timing and all that stuff. Tricky question, obviously. Um, so good segue. Also, like last week, we kind of talked through with Kai and Raul, we talked through like the spectrum that exists, right? Where on one side of the spectrum, maybe it was the week before also, we talked through where one side of the spectrum is kind of flipper, let's say it, right? And middle of the spectrum might be like midterm time horizon, right? Where it's, not so much flipping, but like maybe it's 1 month flipping or 2 month flipping kind of a thing. And the other end of the spectrum is, investor, right? Which is like a bit of a longer time horizon. So, not that we have to overly classify you, but where do you think you fall within there as a result? I think I know the answer to this, but I'm just curious to hear how you think about it. Are you an investor? Are you a flipper? Are you both? Like, how do you think about yourself?
I would say a bit of both. If I had to choose one for crypto and one for NFTs, I would say I'm more of an investor in crypto and more of a trader slash flipper in NFTs.
Yeah, that makes sense. What's interesting about that is if we go back to like your rotation, right? The thing that we were just talking about is, as you go right, to the right in the rotation, it seems like that's where it heads more to investor, right? So like for real estate, for instance, it sounds like you're just ultra investor, right? Other than considering flipping it into ETH, you're like ultra investor, right? So yeah, okay, that makes
Yeah,
complete sense what you're
precisely.
saying. Um, so I'll ask you like a pretty pointed question regarding Poland and kind of what it looks like, so we can start to paint that picture for people to some extent. Now, currently, we're in mid 2022 at this point. How many of your friends in Poland are touching or even aware of some context in NFTs at this point? What does that look like right now?
Um, Not great. Obviously, um, there is a good portion of society which is starting to warm to the idea of crypto, but I feel like, as a rule of thumb, it's probably safe to say that Poland is um, a year or two behind the cutting edge in some of these more innovative industries. And so, whereas the crypto scene in Poland has really picked up over the last 2 or 3 years, the NFT scene has been quite slow. And that's something where maybe over the next year or two, I expect to see more of a ripple, a global ripple, in terms of the effect that NFTs just have globally, and where they're a topic of interest.
That's super interesting. If for those of you who are listening last week, Something we did with Kai and Ral is I pulled up some data to look at like what the populations look like. So if you remember last week, one of Kai's comments was there are a lot of older people who exist in Japan, right? So I'm like, okay, well, let's look at like what the population breakdown looks like, because if we're trying to get expansion in the NFT and Web3 space, and we're trying to figure out where it's going to come from, which countries, all that, like understanding what the population breakdowns are like in those countries is pretty important per Kai's point. So I was actually just looking up Poland right now and what that looks like, and it seems to say the median age in Poland is a good bit younger than other places. So if for anybody who listened last week, Japan's median age was absolute number one in the world. It seems like about 49 years old on average, which kind of suggests, of course, an aging population. Not good for Web3, all by and large. Poland is a lot younger than that. So Japan is 49, Poland is about 42 median age. And I think the other metric that we were looking at too was population under 20 years old, whereas Japan was almost 16, 17%. Poland is about 20%. And 20% is kind of in line, plus or minus, with many of the European countries, a bit of the U.S. as well. The U.S. is actually a little bit higher than that, it seems like, but many of the European countries, I would say. So it's a pretty good indication that there are a decent amount of young people that exist there. So Poland, Europe in general, certainly seems like a right place for it to come. But then Tomer comes in the things that you were saying about the fact that there are some governmental obstacles that exist, in Spain and Poland and those kind of things. So it's an interesting contrast to see how that's going to evolve. Would you say, other than the governmental issues that you pointed out, Tomer, what about like culturally? Would you say in your experience that the people, your friends and otherwise in Poland, are open to something like this and it being a little bit different and unique? Does it tend to be more of a risk averse population, if you had to generalize? Like, what's your feeling on that?
Sure. So I think looking at the demographics of the population is a good line of thinking. And like you say, what doesn't quite make sense here is Poland has a relatively young population, so you would expect them to be quite technically progressive. And Polish people are, especially younger Polish people, are relatively technically progressive. There's a huge number of software houses in Poland that do a lot of the software for Europe. There's CD Project Red, which I'm sure a lot of people in here are familiar with, and some other technical companies. Again, I think there's just a bit of a lag with the hotter, kind of more innovative industries or sectors. But then digging into some of the other kind of systematic differences that I think play into it. In general, I feel like Europe is lagging a bit with crypto and with NFTs, at least compared to North America. That's just the impression I get. I haven't been to a huge number of NFT or crypto conferences here in Europe, but just online, that's the impression you get when you see the presence that some of these crypto projects and NFT projects have at, for example, American events versus European events. And what the reason for that is, I'm not 100% sure. I think there's definitely a cultural aspect here, which I recall Rao kind of commenting on a few weeks
Yep.
ago. With regard to NFTs in Korea, which is just that. I think here in Europe and especially in Poland, there's I mean, the word that comes to mind is extra. I don't want to call American people extra, but it's really a great description of kind of the impression I got visiting, well, LA and New York specifically. But American people obviously have a lot of wealth and they're not afraid to flaunt that wealth with nice cars and cool NFTs, valuable NFTs. Whereas that's obviously a lot less prominent in Europe. Europe is quite conservative as a continent, and Poland especially. So I think that's one aspect of it, and then another aspect of it which I just touched on, at least in Poland's case, is truthfully just money. I think one of the reasons why the younger population here in Poland is not so engaged in NFTs is just because there is a financial barrier to entry. And there's wealth in Poland, but a lot of the wealth in Poland is concentrated among kind of middle-aged and older people. I don't know if that's because of how because of effectively communism and how a lot of wealth was reprivatized into the hands of people who are now kind of middle aged or elderly. But for younger people, they just don't have, I feel like, as much discretionary income to throw around. And what's interesting to me is that even ripples into the way people use crypto here. Um, when I go to when I've been to events in the US and talk to people about crypto, Ethereum is on everyone's mind. Here
Yeah.
in Poland, I would say Binance Smart Chain is as popular, if not more popular, than Ethereum. And I think that's just because it's just got a slightly lower barrier to entry, where people who don't have as much to throw around can still kind of dip their feet in the water and make investments without having to spend way too much on gas.
Yeah, that's all really good stuff and good insight that you provided there. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for laying that all out. That gives like a very good picture of what it's like. And there may be, another element there too, right? Which is the fact that, a lot of these markets are denominated in US dollars, right? Where the median income is higher than other places. But in most cases. But you actually bring up a really interesting thought that I had in my mind, because I agree with you that there's kind of these different markets and different approaches that exist in these markets with the people, and that may be some of the barriers, like we're saying. So I think a really interesting future thing that maybe we'll think about doing is finding the right one or two Australian guests specifically and getting them on. And the reason why I'd be so interested to bring them on is they're not, this isn't the US or Canada, right? It's a different market that exists, yet Australia, I know, majorly over indexes in crypto and I think NFTs as well. So I'd love to pull that apart and figure out what's actually going on in Australia, why that has so much market take up, relatively speaking, when it doesn't necessarily have any reason to, other than maybe median incomes and things like that. So that's very interesting line of thought that you just gave us. Thanks, Tomer. I think the other interesting thing to kind of pull apart together here right now is, so first off, there's like the flexing component that you said exists, right? So it sounds like Europe, not, the biggest flexing market per se. As you pointed out, Ral said, Korea, not the biggest in terms of flexing and being flashy. Kai said similar with Japan. I would have to imagine, when we get some folks on who live in maybe China, Hong Kong, maybe we'll get a little bit of a different picture there, possibly. I think we'll see how that goes, because we definitely did see those kind of runs, those Asia runs that existed, and I think they were probably more driven by China, if I had to guess. But there's those other dimensions that exist, right? So, like, I'm wondering what things, is this going to be a case by case, country by country, just overgeneralizing here, situation where, for Poland to be able to take it up, the things that are relevant to Poland have to, of course, be part of the equation. So maybe that's more focus on in real life utility, if that's what, generally people in Poland care about more, or if it's just brands that are more relevant to Poland, or some other dimension that we haven't even seen yet, right? Maybe it's the real estate element. Like you said, real estate is the most prized asset in Poland specifically, right? I'm sure it is in other cases too, but certainly in Poland. That maybe the big wave of NFTs in Poland comes from when real estate is fully integrated. So I don't know. Any thoughts there? Is it possible that we just don't have the right formula of both brands, meaning project leads and brands, and benefits, for lack of a better description, for like the Polish audience? Is that maybe the challenge?
Sure. So great question. I would say I kind of have two aspects that I'm looking at when it comes to what would most likely and most significantly increase adoption of NFTs specifically in Poland. And you touched on one of them just a second ago, which is brand and benefits. Um, when I said that it feels like Europe is lagging in terms of NFTs and NFT adoption, one reason for that is just seeing all of these big NFT names, whether it's Yuga Labs or Proof or Azuki, pull out all the stops for people at for their holders at NFT LA and NFT NYC and elsewhere and throw these amazing events. I just feel like I'm not seeing that as much in Europe. So I feel like there's definitely a big kind of integrational real life utility component of NFTs that is not really being tapped into in the European markets, and especially in the Polish market. So I think that would be one thing. Just kind of going forward, if we have even just one or a few projects which achieve anywhere near the levels of success that um, Yuga Labs, Proof, or Azuki, not to put them in the same pool. Different people might say they've achieved different levels of success, but all of those projects, in my eyes, have been relatively successful and have been able to deliver kind of real life experiences that I think make them just very memorable and brandable. And I think without seeing a project offer those same experiences in Europe. Until we see that, I feel like adoption is gonna be relatively slow. I think that is one thing that would really ignite adoption here in Europe. And then the second thing is just again with regard to cost. The people who are most likely to be interested in NFTs in Poland are young people who don't tend to have a lot of spare money to throw around. And even just gas costs eat away at that significantly. And that's why, it no longer surprises me when I go to crypto events here that people are more interested in what they can do on Binance Smart Chain than what they can do on Ethereum, because they don't want to spend half a week's paycheck on gas just to do a couple of things on chain. And so I feel like right now there's a bit of a stigma towards non-ETH NFTs, but I feel like going forward, the market is going to find new, I guess, shelling points for alternative chains for NFTs. I don't feel like they've quite reached what their capabilities on Polygon, but maybe with this new wave of ZK rollups coming with Starknet and with ZK Sync, we'll just see the whole NFT market globally move towards more cost efficient chains. And I think that would make it definitely a lot more accessible to people in less affluent countries, whether that's in Europe on a European scale or whether that's worldwide, even looking at places like Africa and poorer regions in Asia.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And building on top of what you're saying, EQ Poppy slash Tweet Poppy or whatever he's about to be called, rotating his name. We were talking about that yesterday. I think he brings up a really good point too, which is, because they're, as you're saying, they're focused on Binance, for instance, or other chains, right? Because they're focused on gas costs, like you said. Many of those chains, other than of course maybe like Solana a good bit, but haven't had those like major run-ups that exist, right? And for many of us in here, that was the catalyst, right? The profit motive was the catalyst, and then we got interested in maybe in the technology and the implications and all that good stuff. But for many of us in here, it was the profit motive originally, right? So, what he was kind of suggesting is if BNB NFTs were the meta, right, and therefore some of the things were running up, if maybe there would be more of that kind of viral buzz that exists in Poland or Eastern Europe or even elsewhere, right? And consequently, it would spread more quickly. But they're just currently looking at the gas costs, but not the place where like the biggest run-ups are happening, which happen to be riskier, of course, also. And that may be the challenge that exists. So I think that ties in very well with what you're saying, Tomer, which is
Yeah,
as we kind of
absolutely.
get
I
more.
agree with that.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just going to briefly say that I completely agree with that. And actually, now that I think about it, next time I go to a crypto event here, I'm going to dig in because I know Solana is another chain people have been talking about that people like here in Poland because it's more affordable. So I'm curious. Maybe I'll meet a few people who've made some decent gains on Solana NFTs, and I can report back. But yeah, sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, no, no. That's perfect what you were saying, and maybe the call to action for all of us in here is if we want to have wider spread, mass adoption. Maybe we need to migrate more of our attention into BNB, or into Binance and Solana and things like that. But there's a trade off that exists there too, right? Which is we're in for many of the people in here are for Canada, U.S. denominated gains, right? So just bigger gains compared to other places where median income might be lower, that kind of a thing. So there's that question that exists too, which is even if we were in the same chain, right? Even if we were spending more time in Binance, for instance, and we all of us all of a sudden started spending more time in Binance projects, for instance, right? Would it still work? Because we're probably by and large, like many people are different parts of the market that exist, right? Where, many people here who have been in early days of NFT might be going after bigger projects with bigger upside, that kind of a thing. And it may just be a little bit, there may be these regional trends that exist, is I guess what I'm suggesting, right? Um, so I don't know, it's unclear where exactly it'll go, but it'll be interesting to see how that evolves, certainly. So I guess, Tomer, now that we're at the current state, right, where we're in a bit of bearish market certainly right now, and we're still kind of figuring out U.S. economy, other economies, like how we kind of fix things up. So everything's of course a little bit shaky right now. How are you thinking about things? How are you mentally allocating your time between investing, trading, building, even, right? Because of course you had your writing and other businesses background. How are you thinking about dividing your time currently? How's that?
Um, yeah, so time wise, I am still just hugely bullish on what crypto and NFTs mean for the future. And so I pretty much decided a year ago that going forward, I am going to dedicate my time to crypto or NFTs or something very closely related to the industry. Um, and then, in terms of just the global macroeconomic situation and positioning myself for that, there's obviously a lot of bearish sentiment right now. Maybe not in the last week, but in general, there's a good amount of bearish sentiment right now. There are a lot of reasons not to think we're going to go into another spectacular crypto or NFT run here. So I'm just trying to make myself, nice and comfy with a few pieces of property here in Poland that I think will be a great kind of hedge against inflation. Next time I get a decent lump sum, I want to start looking abroad as well, diversify a bit there, maybe get a summer house in Portugal or something modest, because I know summer houses in Portugal can cost a few million euros, but I don't mind being nestled on the side of a hill with some goats for my summer vacation. But that's going a bit off topic. Putting some money in property just as a hedge against inflation and not to kind of expose myself to too much downside risk that we might see in equities or in crypto, and then continuing to spend time in crypto almost as a hedge against being under allocated capital wise to another run. I feel like as long as I'm present, even just lurking, and I'm checking in on the crypto and NFT markets, then I don't really see what can go wrong if things continue to remain bearish. I'll just live a more modest lifestyle. Rely on some rental income. If things turn bullish again, well, great. I should hopefully have the context, even just here in MVHQ, and some interesting projects, which can hopefully bring some bottom line fruition as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a good layout. So my obvious question that has been on my mind as you've been talking, of course, is you're obviously very well spoken. You're a good writer. I mean, have you thought about having a content approach where Tomer pushes out content, be it articles and otherwise, within the Web3 and crypto space? Has that been something on your mind? Have you tried it? Have you thought about that at all?
Yeah, good question. I have thought about it. Again, I think this is one of those things where I've thought about a venture like this, and I think I have the skills that would be needed. I just haven't really started putting myself out there yet. So no kind of initial feedback on that yet, and kind of procrastinating a bit. But that's definitely an idea I have right now, especially if the market is a bit quieter. I want to, or I've been thinking about building out a kind of crypto website with a focus on crypto and NFTs. Um, and then, kind of in the meantime, I spent quite a few years now um, doing entrepreneurial things. I have never had a full time job in my life, so there's something right now that's kind of drawing me to apply for some writing jobs in crypto again, just to get closer to some of the building that's happening in this space, even if I don't necessarily have the vision right now or don't want to dedicate kind of the energy even just emotionally to trying to launch my own content channel right now. I definitely think kind of leveraging those writing skills is something I would like to do. And then something I've been working on a lot the last couple of weeks is just trying to brush up my technical skills as well. I think there's a huge opportunity in crypto and NFTs having some programming skills. So I spent the last few weeks and even the last few months trying to teach myself a tiny bit of programming and some technical writing so I can also explore opportunities in those areas too.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. And thanks for being so detailed about how you're thinking about that. Here's the good news for you is without even fully realizing, we're increasingly disseminating more of numbers therapy anyway. So unintentionally, you're putting yourself out there regardless. So maybe that'll serve
Love
as
it.
some help and
Yeah.
catalyst as
DM
well.
me.
Just really chiming in real fast. Board Robot's just asking, where can we find some more of your writing, Tomer? So I guess, if you have anything out there, if you feel comfortable sharing, it sounds like there are people who are interested. That's also whether you feel comfortable, of course, having your name attached if it is, and that kind of a thing. So should you feel comfortable, there are askers in here that are very interested in it. So I guess final question maybe, which is, before we leave, any final thoughts that are on your mind, or equally, what, if anything, are you most excited about in the market right now in crypto, Web3, that kind of thing? Anything have you unusually excited?
Um, yes. In a way, which is that I'm excited for what's next in NFTs, but I don't know what that is, if that makes sense. Whatever it is that's next in NFTs, I'm excited for that. We had huge sell offs a few months ago, saw a lot of liquidity in the NFT markets dry up, and then Goblin Town minted. And it was just really interesting seeing this community pop up around Goblin Town and seeing some of the gains that were made there. I was lucky enough to flip one for a couple of ETH. And then that happened. It kicked off a bit of a free mint meta. Wagdai came along, and for a good few weeks, despite a kind of bearish macro sentiment, the NFT market felt like it was really exciting. There was always something going on. Um, I've been lurking a bit in MVHQ the last couple of weeks. I haven't been spending as many hours in VC as I usually would. And I've mostly been looking at the text chat, but I get the feeling that the free mint meta is dying out a bit right now, and a lot of free mints are a flop. A lot of the profit being made on free mints is not because the project is doing hugely well. It's because someone is able to scalp a few hundredths of an ETH out of a single NFT, and they're able to mint dozens or hundreds, which is just not as exciting or interesting for me as kind of the emergence of a new meta like what we saw with Goblin Town and Wagdai. So that's one thing I'm really curious to see kind of in the next couple of weeks and the next couple of months, regardless of what the macro sentiment be. I'm curious to see what the NFT market does and where eyes move next. And then just following up from that, one other thing that I'm very excited for is, and I touched on this earlier, seeing the longevity of communities like the Bored Ape Yacht Club, like Proof and Moonbirds, and Azuki, just seeing when the initial hype on those things dies down a bit, and multi-month timeframes start to turn into multi-year timeframes. I'm really excited to see how some of these bigger communities steward their holders, and how things are done, and what these communities come to look like long term.
Yeah, I agree. And your comment that you said about I'm excited for what's next, but I don't know what it is. I think that probably resonates. Look, it resonated with me at least. I'm sure some other people in here as well. I'd have to guess. So I think that was an amazing layout that you just gave to everybody. I felt like I'm leaving with a better sense of Poland, Europe, even Spain, which I didn't expect that we would touch on as well, and certainly how you think about investments and in time. So, Tomer, I appreciate it a ton. I mean, this was just a really fantastic hearing from you and how you think about things. And yeah, thank you so much for joining. Thanks everybody else for joining and listening. We are going to keep that thread and weave going into the future. So if we continue on, we're going to get a global mapped picture, demographic picture of how it all fits together. And that is going to continue on. The functional side is going to continue on. It is going to be very interesting and exciting. So thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate it. And same time next week like usual. And hopefully by then we'll get the elevator music working a little bit better too. So we'll work on that too. So thanks so much, everyone.